All right, true confession. It's not just the bucks of Baranof, but I knew more people would come if I said bucks because we all want to see these fun pictures of these big antlered giants we have roaming around the forest, right? So, but really I want to talk about, back up a second. I'm Steve Bethune. I'm a wildlife biologist. I work for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. I've been here in Sitka for about 10 years. Family and I were on Prince of Wales Island for about 10 years before that, so working on deer and black bears on Prince of Wales, and now I get to work on deer and mountain goats, and I got a bear upgrade. I went from black bears to brown bears, so a lot of fun with that. So I want to talk to you about the ways that I monitor the Sitka black-tailed deer population here in Unit 4. And when I say Unit 4, I'm talking about Admiralty, Baranof, and Chichagof Islands. And so why is this important? Well, it's because we all eat deer, right? So there's about 3,400 people every year that hunt Unit 4, and we kill about 5,700 deer every year. So extremely important as far as filling our freezers and being able to have that connection with the environment and living off the land, so to speak. All right, so bait and switch. I know you all wanted to come see cool pictures of deer, and I throw a boring graph up for the first slide. But the reason I did is because the very first thing we do, one of the most important things we do for monitoring the deer population is just purely how many deer are we taking every year. And this is why we harp on you so much to turn in your harvest tickets, because this is all information that you provide to us. So you can see on this graph, it's a historical number of deer that are being harvested, and then the line that goes through the bars is the number of hunters that are participating every year. And so one of the interesting things that I want to highlight on this graph is if you look at 2006 and 2007 on the far left side of the graph, you can see in 2006 we killed nearly 8,000 deer in Unit 4, and then that dropped precipitously to under 2,000 deer the next year. And of course, that was the last time we had a catastrophic snowfall event in Unit 4, where we had deep snows that started early in the season and persisted all the way into April. And so we lost up to 75% of our deer herd in Unit 4, and that's reflected in this graph. Of course, we harvested so many in 2006 because of that snowfall. The deer were stuck on the beaches. They were highly vulnerable to hunters, and people took advantage of that. Another thing we look at based on I promise we're going to get to pictures here in a second. But another thing that we look at as far as the data that you generate is we have all these different types of metrics that we can look at. What communities the hunters are coming from. We can break down the harvest by watersheds. And one of the things we look at is days per deer, or the efficiency of hunters. And this is a real good indicator to the department of how dense our population is compared to other areas around the region. And I'll just also note that Unit 4 provides over half of the deer harvest of all of Southeast Alaska. So we're about 55-60% of all the deer harvested anywhere in Southeast come from Unit 4. And you can see from this graph that on average it takes a hunter about 2.3 days of hunting effort to harvest a deer. And this is fantastic. This is highly efficient hunting. Look at our poor friends over on Douglas Island in Unit 1C. It takes them over 7 days of hunting effort before they finally find a deer to harvest. In other places like Kodiak takes almost 4 days. Unit 2, Prince of Wales, which I'm familiar with, almost twice as much effort required to harvest one deer. So and we monitor this year to year, and helps give us an indication of what the deer population is doing. So, and maybe we just have really, really good hunters here. So, all right. So people come in the office and they ask me all the time, well, how many deer do we have? What's the population of Sitka black-tailed deer in Unit 4? Well, since I'm a biologist, I like to use some highly technical terms. And so I don't know if you guys will be able to keep up with this or not, but this is my answer. We have a lot of deer in Unit 4. And I don't know how many deer there are. We live in a rainforest. We can't count them, right? So we can't just fly around an airplane like they do up in the interior for moose and just count how many moose they have or how many sheep they have. We can to some extent count how many goats we have on Baranof Island, but I don't know how many deer we have. But I do know we have lots. And so what we do is monitor the population for trends and for indices to tell us whether populations are increasing, decreasing, stable, and then we can make management decisions based on those numbers. All right, so some of the things that I do, starting basically yesterday, I went out for the first time starting to look for deer. Every year I do boat-based shoreline surveys where I just go out and I cruise shorelines looking for deer, and I have a body condition index, and I rate those deer on a scale of 0 to 5, 0 being dead, and 5 being like your absolute perfect prime September buck in the alpine. And so I can, if I look at enough deer, I can get a body condition index, and that gives me an idea of how the deer have fared over the wintertime. I also classify deer that I'm seeing by age class and sex, and so I can get buck to doe ratios and fawn to doe ratios. And you can see some of these are the numbers from the last couple of years. These are spectacular numbers. These are like private ranches in Texas doing quality deer control to produce big whitetail bucks. And so these numbers, 43 fawns per doe, that's really phenomenal production. Another thing I do is I do mortality surveys. So once starting about mid-March or so, I have historical transect lines set up all around Unit 4, and I go and I walk the beaches, and I walk the shoreline, and then I about a mile and a half or so, and then I'll go just inside the wood line, and I'll walk back, and I count the number of carcasses that I see over the winter. And you'll know, remember I'll show you another graph here in a second to highlight this. Another thing I do is aerial alpine surveys. This year I did did a couple over by Bethune on Northeast Chichgoff, and then I did one on South Admiralty. It was the first time I'd done the South Admiralty survey, and I set a record for Alaska. This is the most deer we've ever counted anywhere on an aerial survey. We counted nearly 500 deer on South Admiralty, and that came out to about, we use a deer per hour as an index, and so it was spectacular. There were deer everywhere, big groups, 15, 20 bucks all in one group. It was a sight to behold. So really a lot of deer over there. And then a really fun and exciting thing we're doing is we're using trail cameras now. We're always kind of chasing the newest technology and how we can kind of increase our efficiency in monitoring the deer population. We used to walk pellet transects. So we'd have historical lines that we'd run up the mountain, and we'd count the number of pellet groups. And it was a real rough estimate, and we could see trends from year to year if there were large-scale changes in the population. But these trail cameras were getting a much more refined index, and plus we're getting a lot of neat pictures, and we're learning a lot of things and seeing some interesting behaviors that are it's been really helpful. Oh yeah, this is a picture I took from the South Admiralty survey. It was like counting gazelle on the plains of the Serengeti. All right, so going back to the mortality beach surveys that I was talking about. So if you look at 2007, that was the last year we had a giant catastrophic winter event. We counted nearly 4 deer carcasses per mile of beach that we walked. And you can see since then, we've continued to do these beach surveys looking for carcasses, and we're not coming anywhere close to that. So that, to me, is telling me that we have not had, since 06, 07, we have not had a severe winter event that has catastrophically impacted the deer population. In 2022, much like this past year, we kind of had a big snowfall in December. I don't know if you remember that, about 3 years ago. Folks were getting after it and getting a lot of deer, and we thought maybe that was going to be the big year. And so, as a department, we kind of mobilized and got several crews together, and we kind of expanded our mortality survey effort. And I think we did 30 or 40 transects that spring, and we're still under 1 deer per mile. So that bad winter never really materialized. Something fun that you can do as a citizen scientist, and this is one of the things that I do when I do mortality transects. When I find a carcass, you crack open one of the leg bones and you can look at the marrow, and this is a quick down and dirty indicator of the deer's body condition when it passed. And you can see on the left, we all know what healthy bone marrow looks like. It's that white, chalky, waxy, thick substance. And then if you see pictures on the right where that marrow is like a red, almost like gelatin, red jelly looking, that's a deer that's died of starvation. So that's the metabolizing that bone marrow is kind of a last-ditch effort on that deer's part to try to survive. And so if they get to this point, they're going to pass. And so if the carcass is fresh enough, you can look at this and tell for yourself what that deer potentially died of starvation. So if the bone marrow is healthy, then you have to start looking for other clues. Was this maybe a hunter wounding loss, or was a predation event, or some kind of accident, or something like that? But the deer was not starving when it passed. All right, so on our trail cameras, we're about on the third. I'm on the third winter now of trail cameras. I have about 40 trail cameras between here and all the way up to Sitco Bay, just at the end of Hoonah Sound. And so we're trying to refine our techniques. We're trying to figure out how are we going to use this data. But at this point, one of the main things we're finding is again, Unit 4 has about 3 times as many deer as anywhere else in the region as far as density. And then I know a lot of you are probably asking, well, what about this winter, right? We had a really deep winter event in December. We had cold temperatures. How are our deer doing? And I started hearing people talk about, this is going to be snowpocalypse, and this is going to be awful. And I think we dodged a bullet. The temperatures warmed up. We don't have any snowpack now. These are a couple pictures that I took in January. The buck on the left, you can see, is starting to look pretty ragged. And then the fawn on the right, some of you may have noticed this when you were out hunting. We had a pretty extensive incidence of hair loss this year, which is caused by a biting lice that seems to be more prevalent when the deer are under more stress. But again, as we all seen, this is snow levels in January, so everything pretty much melted back, and now the deer can move freely upon the landscape. The deer can get back under the trees where there are evergreen forbs and year-round things to eat, and they can start to recover from that December event. So I think we're going to be okay. And I'm seeing lots of deer. People reporting to me that they're seeing deer, and the deer look pretty healthy. So. All right, as promised, here's the bucks of Baranof. Right, these are the highlights. These are some of the biggest bucks that I've gotten on trail cameras throughout Unit 4 over the past couple of years. It's actually really interesting I scroll through all these pictures and I kind of get to know these bucks. A lot of them hang out in the same place for a long time. They like the pole, and I'll talk about that in a second. But they like to rub on the pole. They like to polish their antlers on the pole. But then I get bucks like the buck on the bottom right. That's the only picture I got of him, and he's the biggest buck I've ever gotten a picture of. He's nearly record book class, big 4x4, very close to town actually. And I get this one picture of him walking through, and it's really interesting. Like, where did he go? I'd like to find him myself. All right, so some of the interesting things we see on these trail camera pictures, I get lots of really fun rut activity in November, so lots of chasing events. I've got whole sequences of does and bucks just like going round and round and round and round, so pretty fun. This is an interesting picture in that this is also rut behavior. The buck in this picture is displaying what's called a flamen response, where he's got a gland on the inside of his lips where he can test for whether the doe is receptive or not. But if you note the date, you see that the date up in the top left, April 20th. Well, when does the rut end? Holy smokes! So we've all heard, if you're a hunter in the room, you've heard of the second rut. But is there a third, fourth rut? I don't know. But this is really interesting observation. And we have seen fawns in some of our previous studies that are born in August and September, so that's pretty interesting to note. I don't necessarily set up the cameras to get like really beautiful pictures, but every once in a while the lighting and the subject just works out, and this is a really neat picture. But we can also see productivity from the pictures, how many fawns are being born, what percentage of the does are having twins, so good information from that. Just fun things like this is a buck that's just shedding its velvet. It's kind of the end of August. We can get timing of antler drop. And you can note on this buck, he's only got one antler. And then the poles. I wanted to mention the poles that you're seeing in all these pictures, and those are snow stakes, so we can monitor the depth of snow and see what the snow is doing throughout the winter. And this is a picture up in Hoonah Sound, and this is about 40. I think it's about 42 inches of snow. This is on January 22nd. Our cameras take a picture at a specified time, 10 a.m. every morning. So I get at least one picture every day. And so this is shows the snow depth. But then look, just 9 days later, we're down to 4 inches of snow. And we see this a lot in Unit 4. We'll get these big snowfall events, and then it warms back up and melts off. So this is not a hindrance necessarily to the deer. Same snow event, but different location, and you can see this deer this is getting to the point where about 16 to 18 inches of snow, when the deer actually have to start pushing with the snow with their brisket, and that's when it becomes kind of energetically expensive for the deer. And if we get prolonged periods of this, the deer are really using a lot of reserves to move around. If we got any kids in the audience, you might want to close your eyes. My wife didn't want me to put this picture in the presentation. She said she thought they needed their privacy. But I'm like, well, if you're going to choose to do this right in front of the camera, it's kind of on you. So, but it's actually pretty interesting behavior to be able to actually to get eyes on. People don't see this very often, and then the interesting thing is we can note the date. And the gestation period for deer is 200 days, so this doe is going to have fawns around June 13th, which is right in line with normal averages. And then lastly, of course, we don't just get deer pictures. I get pictures of all kinds of stuff, a lot of bears, and we're trying to figure out, how can we incorporate this camera data into other animals? Can we get any kind of population estimate for the bears in Unit 4? I get eagles, I get otters, I get dogs, I get people. It's really fun to get the picture of the deer running by the camera, and then 20 minutes later you see the Elmer Fudd guy, sneaking by. So that didn't work out for him. But I could talk on this forever. I was given 10 minutes. I'm probably already over time. So I'll leave it at that and open up if we have time for any questions.
Yeah, we have time for a couple questions if anyone has any.
Hi, thank you so much. That was really interesting. I was wondering for your shoreline surveys, if you do those, just how often and what the kind of temporal scale is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I pick around this time of year because I want to be consistent every year. It's not going to be fair to the deer if I do the shoreline surveys in April, because then they've had 2 more months to either recover, or if the snow's bad, to deteriorate body-wise size or body condition-wise. So I do it from now until about mid-March or so, and then as many nice boatable days as I can get away from behind my desk, I will go and do. I try to get, obviously the more deer you can get, the better your sample size, the better your results are going to be. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Steve. I'm curious if you have anything to say about the size of deer, say in Unit 2 versus or Unit 4 versus down in Prince of Wales. Wondering if the numbers are resulting in the smaller deer or competition.
Yeah, that's a good question, and often there is a density-related effect, but I also think, particularly with Prince of Wales, because of the limestone and the karst there, the soils are just way more productive than we have here, and so the nutrient content in the plants there is spectacularly above what we have here, and so I think that's probably why you see the antler growth there. I'm not as familiar with Kodiak and what the mineral structure of the plants is there, but yeah, they do get, it's obviously a different environment, being more wide open spaces. Their deer population is not as, they have high populations, but it's more of a boom and bust kind of cycle, and they have a different environment as far as open terrain versus the rainforest that we have here. So yeah, that's a good observation.
Can you hear me? Okay. My question is about moose. Has any moose came around here?
We had a moose on Baranof Island about 20 years ago. Yeah, one documented moose. He came over here. He was seen in the wintertime and then never seen again. So, but a fun fact is that we do have moose now in Unit 4 over by Hoona on the west side of Port Frederick. And so we just did our first ever Unit 4 moose survey last February. We counted 6 moose, and I have trail cameras over there as well, so I'm doing a little study over there to see how many we have. And I think we've had about 12 to 15 moose over there, and they seem to be expanding, so there were cows with calves, so maybe someday we'll have a moose hunt out of Hoona.
My question was about the efficiency data.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if that data is adjusted at all for the kind of style of hunting across different units. We do a lot of boat hunting here. I would imagine on Prince of Wales there's probably a lot more road hunting along the logging roads. How do you adjust for that, or do you adjust for it?
We don't adjust for that, and so, but of course there's plenty of boat-based hunting going on in Kodiak, in Unit 6 out of Cordova. It's a lot of boat-based hunting, so yeah, it's just a straight efficiency. We take the number of hunters and the number of days and the number of deer, and we calculate that. So, yep.
Maybe one last question here.
Thanks, Steve. That's fascinating, but I got a million questions for you now. Probably give you a call, but are you using drones? Let's think about the technology. One of the things you mentioned that the trail cams were getting, I think, 1 shot a day, but then it looked like there might be motion sensors on it too. I don't know.
Right.
But then just thinking about other technology, are you using drones?
Yeah, so you're right. The trail cameras take 1 picture a day at a specific time, but then they're also motion activated. So I know I'm getting at least 1 picture, but then I'll get, I can get 100 pictures if a buck decides to, stand in front of my camera for 10 minutes. We're always behind as far as a department on technology, so drones are something we are thinking about. There's going to be a day, and I won't be working for the department anymore at that point, but there's going to be a day where a biologist sits at his desk and drives his drone and does his mountain goat survey. And part of me is like, that's kind of sad from a biologist standpoint, but the technology is going to be there someday, and we are starting to look at drones. We have a couple of biologists that are in other area offices that have gotten their pilot's license, so to speak, and are looking into that. So yeah, and then you couple that with potentially like infrared technology or thermal imaging, and maybe we'll be able to fly over the forest and actually count deer. So yeah.
All right. I know we could keep asking many questions. We're
Thank
going to
you,
move
everyone.
on, but thank you so much, Steve Bethune.